Glenn Drummond is a partner and chief innovation officer for a buyer experience agency called Corey. He leads a team of innovators and change agents working in marketing, new product development, executive leadership, and customer experience design. In these assignments, Glenn's attention is typically directed both inside and outside the corporation. Inside, Glenn draws upon a regularly refreshed set of models to help clients identify and overcome the conceptual barriers to innovation that have been erected in the natural course of running their business. Outside, Glenn leads customer insight initiatives that integrate talents in consumer ethnography, analytics, data visualization, and storytelling. Let's meet Glenn now to explore the topic of innovation and what it means to be a Chief Innovation Officer. So Glenn, thank you very much for joining me today.
Happy to be here.
Great. So why don't you start just by telling us about your business and what you do within it?
Right. So Corey's a buyer experience agency. We look at the evolution of marketing from something that starts with the goals of the marketer and their desire to sell their goods and so on in the marketplace. And the way it's evolved to discipline that fundamentally starts with the goals of customers. And we try and help our clients get in the path of those goals and really rebuild their marketing processes from the outside in. So rather than from the factory through to the marketing to the sales organization, rather starting with the customers and working the whole process back in.
So we all know that your role, based on the introduction, is Chief Innovation Officer. So I'm interested to know, what is your operational definition of innovation?
Well, there's a few that I like. The idea of adding another dimension to performance is one that came from Peter Drucker, and I think that's quite interesting because what we see going on in the marketplace today is that industry after industry reaches a point of commodification where there really isn't a great opportunity within the existing model of how things are done to gain a sustainable advantage over a competitor or to assure your shareholders that there is a long and sustainable stream of profits ahead. This is diagnosed in Blue Ocean Strategy, where the authors, after scanning the literature, gave a rather grim assessment of all the management theories that said this is the way to do it. No, this is the way to do it. Well, their observation is that the only basis for advantage is the creation of a new market or a new industry. Clock speed talks about the idea of sustainable advantage needing to be modulated to a notion of a sequence of temporary advantages. And that sequence of temporary advantages tends to be based on a different set of disciplines today than one would have thought about 20 years ago. 20 years ago, one would think about some sort of patentable or very hard to imitate technical innovation. Things that are based on, in the world of science and physics. And today, it seems more and more the pursuit of these temporary advantages is that they're rooted in discovering something about the customer that nobody else has yet discovered, and zeroing in on that like a little piece of secret wisdom or knowledge that an organization has, and by leveraging that and organizing themselves to satisfy a particular goal or a particular need on the part of a customer, to gain an island of advantage, a small monopoly on a particular constellation of motives on the part of the customer. And if that process becomes scalable and repeatable, organizations can then move through a series of temporary advantages and develop pockets of advantage within a marketplace with many different kinds of customers. That to me seems to be where not just innovation is going, but where marketing is going, and where the secret for success for an organization, as you look out 5, 10, 15 years, it'll be based, I think, on more finite kinds of value monopolies established through a repeatable process of discovering those insights and then translating those into conceptual recombinations of value that were not available anywhere else in the industry at the time you did them. And by the time they're imitated by competitors, you're on to the next thing. So that's kind of a current view of innovation, and I think one that differs quite a bit from a more technically centered view of innovation from earlier.
The temporariness of it is interesting, and also your comment that as a result of that, you require a process that's repeatable in order to keep doing it. It's very interesting. But so I love that perspective of it. At the same time, though, it seems like really it's logical then that most companies would aspire to be highly innovative, but actually few seem to be very successful at it. So based on what you've seen in your experience, what are some of the key barriers to companies being successful in innovation?
Yeah, great question. So, my mother is quite elderly, and we bought her a tricycle some time ago, and having ridden a bicycle for many years, but realizing that, in her late 80s, it's probably a bit hazardous. In order to learn how to ride the tricycle, she had to unlearn how to ride a bicycle. And it was really quite difficult for her to unlearn the aspects of balance and changing direction and so on that accorded with, a three-wheeled vehicle instead of a two-wheeled vehicle.
Right.
And the analogy, I think, is relevant. Organizations that, have developed a success algorithm, as they are going to innovate, they have to not just change, but they have to unlearn things that they know to be true. For instance, the differences that make a difference between their customers, they know are rooted in things like organizational scale or demographic granulations and so on. And in order for them to compete in this new kind of value creation environment, those differences that make a difference between customers now are much more likely to be rooted in the structure of motivations than they are in the demographics. And time after time, as we work with clients in this area, we go in with a study sample cell that indeed respects the original viewpoint of demographic differences, or difference in organizational size, and so on. And what we find over and over again is that the motivational structures are not in a dependent relationship to demographics or organizational scale or geography and so on. They have to do more with what makes people tick and what makes them tick with respect to the particular field of experience we're dealing with. Now, the cool thing about that is it's perfectly possible to go out there and learn how to do that, and it's perfectly possible to share that kind of insight inside an organization. But the trick is to understand that the existing knowledge, the existing belief system, in some cases the accounting system, the organizational structure, and many of the things that make the organization successful today need to be viewed from the standpoint of their inherent inertia and their capacity to act as an immune system to prevent a new insight from taking hold.
So that's interesting. So there are certain things that become protected in a sense, and therefore that brings me to my next question, because not every organization has the role of Chief Innovation Officer. So can you tell us, those of us that don't necessarily aren't familiar with that role, what is the role and responsibility of someone in that function?
Right. So, because I'm working both as a partner in our organization and as a consultant to our clients, I'll sort of deal with them first, on the organization inside, and then secondly in the consulting side looking out.
Yeah.
Organization in, the thing about innovations is that it's not always clear at the outset how they're going to make money, how they're going to fit, if they ever are, into the business model overall, and whether there's a viable business case for them. Now, there are some legendary examples. Xerox PARC was the scene of the invention of the GUI. And as John Seeley Brown tells the story, when the GUI was invented and the executives from Xerox came out to Xerox PARC to look at it, the question that they could not overcome was, how are we going to sell more toner with this GUI?
Right.
So they recognized it was kind of interesting, but they just couldn't see how it was going to sell more toner. And because of that, Xerox didn't fund the further development of the GUI, and there were a couple of smart kids that rolled out of that enterprise and started a little organization called Apple, and the rest was history. But there are ideas that have a validity to them, but cannot be proven and cannot be defended on the basis of how they're going to contribute to the financial success of the business. And there is a need for someone who can act as the godfather of those ideas when they're in their infancy, and the supporter and mentor and the patron of the creative and imaginative people who are bringing those ideas forward in the organization. Someone who can perhaps discriminate between ones that truly are interesting and ones that, while they may be interesting, are for some discernible reason not going to be successful in the organization. So I think the role is one that requires somebody having gone through that battle a few times themselves, perhaps having won a couple and lost a couple, and having some sensitivity to the dynamics around working on ideas that don't yet have a business model to support them.
Yeah. And so that's kind of the role or the contribution of the Chief Innovation Officer, which makes a great deal of sense. What's the value of having one?
Well, I think if you don't have someone who can be, and I'm going to use the term patron in the same sense of the Medicis and the great artistic creativity of the Renaissance in Italy. If you don't have a patron, then what did artists do in society? They brought a different way of seeing that its inherent value rested in being different from the way things are being seen. If you don't have someone with a certain amount of organizational responsibility and status to operate in that role of patron, then those different ways of seeing are really, they're working against the mechanisms of culture that are intended to keep the organization successful and profitable.
And I suppose a lot of those are really where the power base lives, because that's where the money's being made right now.
Right.
So the other thing that I'm thinking as you said that is that it seems to be that there's a strong interconnection between company culture and innovation. And I think you were hinting at it right there, but maybe you could bang on that a little bit and give me your thoughts on the interdependency of those things.
Well, sure. I mean, one of the operational definitions of culture in a business is how we do things around here. And innovation is inherently opposed to how we do things around here. And generally speaking, innovation projects tend to have a senior kind of patron or sponsor, and they tend to have a group of young, enthusiastic people who are frankly working a little bit at the margins of the enterprise. And they come in contact eventually with the middle management of the organization. And the middle management of the organization are the people who really have taken upon themselves the personal responsibility to protect the success of the business. And as such, they function very much as an immune system. This is not a criticism of any of the people in that role. This is an observation about the collective effect of people who work in the middle management layer of an organization. That they are there to keep the business profitable, to keep it executing successfully. And, the collective effect of their efforts is to screen out ideas that interfere with and are opposed to the success of the business. But innovative ideas, and especially the disruptive ones, the ones that could disrupt a whole industry and create enormous success, or could protect an organization in a sort of prophylactic way against being disrupted by a competitor. Those ideas are generally opposed to the way we do things here. And so, yes, culture is bound up in the organizational chart, it's bound up in processes, it's bound up in design. And, culture and innovation, are generally, inattention.
To each other. So there's probably some people that are listening that actually are a bit interested in learning a bit more about the topic of innovation. If you could recommend a book to start with, what one might you, or if maybe there's more than one, but what books are coming to mind?
Yeah, there's probably a few that would really jump out. I would say that Oren Harari's book, Jumping the Curve, while a few years old now, is very useful in identifying sort of the diachronic approach to industry evolution, where a moment in time arrives, and to that old Shakespearean phrase, I think, there's a tide to the events of men, and taken at its peak, leads one way, and not taken leads another. And terrible paraphrasing there, but you get the idea. Anyway, Harari's book, Jumping the Curve, talks about this moment where an organization that's been perfectly successful either jumps to the next way of creating value or sails off into really obscurity and diminished possibilities, while others take that role. A few years later, Clay Christensen came along with a very useful contribution to the literature called The Innovator's Dilemma. And he was observing essentially the same thing, but connecting it specifically with disruption at the level of technology. And he diagnosed that industry after industry, the market structure of the oligopoly of big brands could survive through a period of sustaining innovations, but at the moment that a disruptive technology came along that required a real wholesale swap out of the deep technologies that drove value in that business, that the big brands usually missed. And they missed, this is the interesting part, because they listened to their customers. And the disruptive technologies tended to enter at the margins of the industry. They tended to appeal to non-consumers of that industry, and then they built their base from there. Eventually, the product became appealing to the core customers in the industry, but rarely was that the first group of buyers to buy. And by making this distinction between sustaining and disruptive innovation, Christensen made, I think, a really important contribution to the literature. I'm reading right now a few books that I think are going to be more and more important. One is John Seeley Brown's The Power of Pull. And the idea is that we have had historically a notion about the production of value in a physical sense. And as the economy digitizes to a greater and greater extent, we move from, as he says, stocks to flows, and that business opportunity grows on the basis of that. It's perhaps a turgid read, but I think there's a fairly profound insight in there. And those are a couple that I draw attention to.
Very interesting. So you sound like you're a man that has a lot on the go all the time. So therefore, are there any practices that you're developing, initiatives or projects that you're particularly excited about that you'd like to comment on?
Yeah, so we are working on a body of thinking here at Quarry that is likely to be expressed in a series of video blogs. In the first iteration, we're starting with our own internal blog behind a firewall. The concept is called brand ergonomics. And the essential concept of brand ergonomics is that we need to create space for our clients' customers in the branding work we do. If I can kind of zoom out a moment to just make a cultural observation, we're in a culture where there seems to be a real anxiety over agency, where people, are feeling like their power is diminished, limited, constrained, and we see this in 100 different expressions. The Occupy movement, the reaction to different products, the sudden throwing over of big brand franchises in favor of somebody else who comes along. And one of the observations that comes from our thinking about brand ergonomics is that there's a difference between acquiescence and agreement with a brand value proposition. But the techniques that we have used to date to understand what customer loyalty is have not been able to really distinguish between acquiescence and agreement. Mm-hmm. So people buy your product or service, that trips a little flag in a database, your IP address is associated with the purchase, you've purchased before, maybe you purchased more products from the same company, and you're seen by some computer somewhere as a loyal customer. The computer, provides that screen view, and then other human beings, being affected by the way this computer has reacted to the behavior of people, produce this meaning of loyalty. And of course, we all know that this can be suddenly turned on its head as people shift their patterns quickly. And the issue is, did that sudden conversion take place because it wasn't that you'd actually agreed to that brand value proposition, it was only that you'd acquiesced to it as the best available approximation of what you were really seeking, and nobody took the trouble to find out what you were really seeking and then wrap that whole experience around it. And this business of the injection of agency back into the buyer's world and giving them that sense of agency as they travel through the whole buying process seems to me to be the real frontier of the effective design of a buying experience, and it seems to me a really important part of building the kinds of brand relationships that are more sustainable and less susceptible to these sudden inversions of loyalty that people are seeing all over the place.
Glenn, thank you very much. We were talking today about innovation with Chief Innovation Officer Glenn Drummond.